Let me ask you a question right at the beginning. If thinking small could make you successful, wouldn't everyone already be winning? The truth is, most people are not limited by their talent, their education, or their background. They are limited by the size of their thinking. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your mindset. And if your mindset is small, your life will always feel crowded. Here's a powerful reality most people don't want to face. Small thinking produces small results. You cannot expect big outcomes from tiny expectations. If you aim low, you might hit it, but you'll never be fulfilled. Thinking small keeps you safe, but it also keeps you stuck. It convinces you to play defense in a game that was designed for you to dominate. The problem isn't that your dreams are too big. The problem is that your thinking is too small to support them. Let me say this clearly. Your life will never outgrow the thoughts you allow to live in your mind. If you keep telling yourself, I can't, it's too hard, or people like me don't win, you are building a mental prison and then calling it reality. Big thinkers don't wait for permission. They decide first, then figure it out later. They don't ask, is this possible? They ask, how can this be done? Most people underestimate what happens when you shift your thinking. When you think bigger, you act bolder. When you act bolder, opportunities respond to you differently. The world doesn't reward potential, it rewards perception. And when you see yourself as more, the world starts treating you as more. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you believe you deserve. Let me give you a hook that can change your life. Your income, impact, and influence will never exceed your identity. If you see yourself as average, you will live an average life, no matter how hard you work. Hard work without big thinking leads to exhaustion, not elevation. But when you upgrade your identity, your behavior follows automatically. Success becomes less about effort and more about alignment. Understand this. Thinking big doesn't mean you won't be afraid. It means fear no longer controls your decisions. Every breakthrough requires a stretch. Every new level demands a new version of you. If you want a life you've never had, you must be willing to think thoughts you've never thought. Comfort is the enemy of growth, and small thinking is comfort disguised as logic. Most people don't realize that the greatest limitations in their lives are not external, they are internal. There is no wall in front of you, no locked door holding you back. There is an invisible ceiling above you that you place there without knowing it. The moment you begin to think small, you quietly agree to live beneath your potential. Small thinking doesn't announce itself as fear, it disguises itself as realism, caution, and being practical. But practicality without vision is just another form of self-sabotage. Here's a hard truth that shakes people when they hear it. You can work harder than everyone around you and still never rise if your thinking remains small. Effort does not break ceilings. Belief does. Small thinking creates boundaries before you ever take action. It decides what's possible for you before life even gets a chance to respond. That's why two people with the same skills, same resources, and same opportunities can end up in completely different places. One thinks in limits, the other thinks in possibilities. Small thinking is dangerous because it feels safe. It tells you not to aim too high so you don't get disappointed. It tells you not to speak up so you don't get judged. It tells you not to try something new so you don't fail. But what it doesn't tell you is the cost. The cost is a life of almost, could-have-beens, and unfulfilled potential. The cost is waking up years later wondering how you stayed busy but never truly progressed. An invisible ceiling is the most powerful key into prison because you don't know you're inside it. You assume that what you see is all there is. You start saying things like, this is just how life works, or people like me don't get those opportunities. And the moment you accept that story, you stop reaching higher. You don't stop because you can't. You stop because you've convinced yourself that reaching higher is pointless. Think about this. Life will never challenge the limits you don't push against. If you never stretch your thinking, your environment has no reason to expand. Opportunities don't disappear. They become invisible to people who aren't thinking at the level required to see them. That's why some people walk into the same room and see problems while others see possibilities. It's not intelligence, it's perspective. Small thinking also shapes your standards. You tolerate things you should outgrow. You accept situations you should outlevel. You stay in spaces that no longer serve you, not because you belong there, but because your thinking hasn't given you permission to leave. And the longer you stay under a ceiling, the more normal it feels. Eventually, you stop questioning it altogether. Here's a powerful shift most people never make. Your current results are not a reflection of your maximum capacity. They are a reflection of your current mindset. The ceiling you're under is adjustable. The moment your thinking expands, pressure builds against that ceiling, and pressure always forces change. But pressure only comes when you decide that where you are is no longer acceptable. Small thinking shrinks your vision, and a small vision produces small decisions. Small decisions lead to predictable outcomes, and predictable outcomes lead to frustration, not fulfillment. Growth begins the moment you stop negotiating with your limitations and start challenging them. The real danger isn't failing, it's living comfortably beneath what you're capable of achieving. The moment you recognize that the ceiling is self-imposed, something powerful happens. You stop waiting for permission. You stop blaming circumstances. You realize that the next level of your life doesn't require a new environment. It requires a new way of thinking. And when your thinking grows, ceilings don't disappear quietly. They break. Most people believe their results come from their effort, their strategy, or their circumstances, but the real source is much deeper than that. Your results are a mirror, not of how hard you work, but of how you see yourself. Long before money shows up in your account, confidence shows up in your identity. Long before opportunities respond to you, your self-image has already decided how far you're allowed to go. You don't live at the level of your potential, you live at the level of your identity. Here's a question that disrupts comfort. Why do some people raise their prices without apology, speak with authority, and walk into rooms as if they belong, while others hesitate, discount themselves, and wait to be chosen? It's not intelligence. It's not luck. It's identity. When you see yourself as valuable, you stop asking for validation. When you see yourself as capable, you stop waiting for approval. Your behavior will always obey the strongest belief you have about who you are. Your identity acts like an internal thermostat. No matter how high or low your results go, they eventually return to what you believe you deserve. That's why people sometimes get a breakthrough and then lose it just as quickly. Their external success outpaced their internal identity. Until your self-image catches up, you'll unconsciously sabotage anything that feels unfamiliar. Not because you want to fail, but because your identity hasn't been upgraded to sustain that level. Most people try to change their life by changing their actions, but actions without identity alignment require constant force. That's exhausting. When identity shifts, behavior changes naturally. You don't have to convey. A person who sees themselves as disciplined to show up consistently, they just do. You don't have to push a person who sees themselves as a leader to take responsibility. They move that way instinctively. Identity is the root, results are the fruit. Here's a powerful hook that changes perspective. You will never outperform the version of yourself you believe in. If you see yourself as average, average results will feel normal. If you see yourself as limited, limitations will feel logical. And every time life presents an opportunity that exceeds your identity, you'll find a reason to shrink it, delay it, or walk away from it. Not consciously, but automatically. Your identity also shapes how others respond to you. People don't just listen to what you say, they respond to the certainty behind it. The world has an uncanny ability to sense self-perception. When you carry yourself as someone who expects respect, opportunities adjust. When you show up unsure of your worth, doors that could have opened remain closed. The marketplace doesn't reward need, it rewards confidence anchored in value. One of the most dangerous mistakes is confusing humility with self-diminishment. True humility is knowing your value and not needing to shout it. Small identity, on the other hand, hides behind politeness and calls it modesty. It keeps you quiet when you should speak, small when you should expand, and hesitant when you should decide. And over time, that silence becomes a habit, not a choice. The good news is this: identity is learned, not inherited. Start making decisions based on long-term impact. You begin to ask higher quality questions. Instead of, how do I get by? You ask, how do I build something that lasts? Those questions demand different actions, and different actions produce different outcomes. Here's another powerful hook. Hesitation is not a lack of courage, it's a lack of conviction. When you truly believe something is possible for you, movement becomes automatic. You don't overthink every step, you adjust as you go. Big thinkers understand that imperfect action beats perfect intention every time. Progress rewards movement, not perfection. When thinking expands, confidence stops being something you try to generate and becomes something you express. You speak differently, you negotiate differently, you show up differently, and people respond differently. Not because you're pretending, but because your internal belief has shifted. Big thinking gives your actions weight, and weight commands attention. Many people confuse preparation with progress. They stay busy planning, learning, and waiting, believing that action will come once they feel ready. But readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. Big thinkers don't wait to feel ready, they act ready, and readiness follows. The act of moving forward creates the confidence they were waiting for. Expanded thinking also builds resilience. When you see the bigger picture, temporary setbacks lose their power. You don't interpret obstacles as stop signs, you see them as data. Feedback becomes fuel instead of frustration. The bigger the vision, the smaller the setbacks feel in comparison. That perspective keeps you moving when others quit. Once your thinking grows, action stops being forced. You no longer need external pressure to perform because internal alignment is doing the work. Your actions begin to match the future you see instead of the past you're leaving behind. And the moment your actions change consistently, your results have no choice but to follow. Fear has a way of feeling larger than it actually is, especially when your vision is small. When you don't have a compelling picture of where you're going, fear fills the empty space. It speaks louder, feels heavier, and dictates your decisions. But the moment your vision grows, fear begins to lose its authority. Not because it disappears, but because it finally has competition. And fear cannot dominate a mind that is occupied with purpose. Here's a truth that challenges most people. Fear is not the problem. Lack of vision is. Fear exists in everyone who is growing, but it only controls those who don't have something bigger pulling them forward. When your vision is unclear, fear becomes the loudest voice in the room. It tells you what could go wrong, why now isn't the right time, and why you should wait. But when your vision is clear, fear becomes background noise. It's still there, but it no longer makes the decisions. A small vision magnifies risk. A big vision redefines it. When your goals are small, every mistake feels catastrophic. Every setback feels personal. Every opinion feels threatening. But when your vision expands, you begin to understand that growth requires discomfort. You stop asking, how do I avoid fear? And start asking, what is fear trying to protect me from that I no longer need protection from? That shift alone weakens its grip. Think about this hook. Fear thrives where purpose is absent. That's why people who lack direction overthink everything. They replay conversations, imagine worst case scenarios, and delay action endlessly. Their mind is busy but not productive. A larger vision organizes your thoughts. It gives your mind a job. Instead of scanning for danger, it starts scanning for opportunity. When your vision grows, your relationship with fear changes. You stop seeing fear as a signal to stop and start seeing it as confirmation that you're stretching. Fear becomes evidence that you're stepping beyond the familiar. In the familiar, while comfortable, has never been the birthplace of transformation. Growth always feels unsafe to the version of you that's being left behind. Small vision asks, what if I fail? Big vision asks, what if I never try? That question alone has the power to silence excuses. When the cost of staying the same becomes greater than the discomfort of change, movement becomes inevitable. Vision shifts your focus from short-term discomfort to long-term fulfillment. And fear cannot compete with a future that matters deeply to you. A bigger vision also connects you to something beyond yourself. When your goals are only about comfort, fear easily convinces you to quit. But when your vision involves impact, contribution, or legacy, fear loses leverage. You realize that playing small doesn't just affect you, it limits what others could receive through you. Responsibility has a way of shrinking fear. Another hook most people overlook. Fear grows when you stare at it, but it shrinks when you move toward meaning. Action in alignment with vision is fear's greatest enemy. You don't wait for fear to leave before acting. You act and fear adjusts. Momentum weakens fear because progress builds evidence that you can handle more than you thought. As vision expands, confidence follows, not because you suddenly feel brave, but because you know why you're moving. Purpose produces endurance. You stop needing constant reassurance because your direction is clear. Even when doubt shows up, it no longer has the power to turn you around. It may slow you briefly, but it cannot stop you. When vision grows, fear no longer asks for permission. It gets informed. You acknowledge it, but you don't obey it. You understand that fear's job is to warn, not to lead. And once vision takes the lead, fear falls into its proper place, a feeling, not a frame. Most people believe disappointment comes from failure, but in reality, it comes from expectation. What you consistently expect sets the tone for how you think, how you act, and what you allow. Expectations are not passive thoughts, they're commands you give to your subconscious. And your subconscious works relentlessly to make those commands real. That's why life often looks like a reflection of what you anticipated rather than what you hoped for. Here's a hook that shifts perspective immediately. Your expectations are silently training the world on how to respond to you. If you expect little, you prepare for little. You speak cautiously, you negotiate weakly, and you settle quickly. Not because you lack ability, but because your internal forecast doesn't include expansion. Low expectations don't protect you from disappointment, they guarantee underperformance. Expectation influences behavior before results ever show up. When you expect success, you show up differently. You listen more intently, you take better care of details, and you stay engaged longer. When you expect failure, even unconsciously, you hesitate. You delay decisions, avoid responsibility, and create exit strategies before you even begin. The outcome is decided long before the effort ends. Many people confuse optimism with expectation. Optimism says, I hope this works. Expectation says, I am prepared for this to work. Hope waits, expectation moves. Hope watches, expectation participates. That's why people who expect more tend to get more. They align their actions with the outcome they anticipate. The mind follows expectation, and the body follows the mind. Another powerful hook to consider: you don't rise to your goals, you default to your expectations. In moments of pressure, stress, or uncertainty, you won't perform at your best. You'll perform at what you believe is normal for you. If your expectation is average, average becomes your safe zone. Excellence feels foreign, and anything foreign feels uncomfortable. Expectations also shape what you tolerate. When you expect little from yourself, you tolerate distractions, excuses, and inconsistency. When you expect more, those same behaviors become unacceptable. Standards rise naturally with expectation. You stop negotiating with habits that don't serve the future you anticipate. Discipline becomes easier because it aligns with who you expect yourself to be. What many people fail to realize is that expectation is contagious. Others often treat you according to the level you treat yourself. When you expect respect, preparation, and value, you signal it through posture, tone, and decisions. When you expect to be overlooked or underpaid, you unconsciously confirm that belief through your behavior. The world is responding to the expectations you project. Expectation also determines resilience. When challenges arise, people with low expectations interpret them as confirmation that they were right to doubt. People with high expectations interpret challenges as part of the process. Same obstacle, different meaning. Meaning determines persistence. Persistence determines outcome. Here's a truth that disrupts comfort. Expecting more requires responsibility. You can't expect excellence and continue with casual effort. High expectations demand alignment. They force you to become more disciplined, more focused, and more intentional. That's why many people avoid raising their expectations. It requires them to rise as well. The moment you raise your expectations, you begin to notice opportunities you once ignored. You listen differently. You ask better questions. You prepare more thoroughly. Life doesn't suddenly change, you do. And as you change, results adjust accordingly. Expectation sharpens perception, and perception directs behavior. When you expect more, you stop seeing improvement as optional. Growth becomes the standard. You no longer wait for motivation to show up because your expectation demands action. And over time, those actions compound into outcomes that once felt out of reach but were always within alignment of what you chose to expect. From the moment you were created, growth was built into your design. Nothing in nature exists to remain static. Everything either expands or decays, and human potential follows the same law. Yet many people live as if staying the same is neutral, as if comfort is harmless. It isn't. Comfort is the slowest form of decline. Expansion is not a luxury reserved for a few. It is the natural expression of who you are when fear, doubt, and limitation no longer lead your decisions. Here's a hook that reframes everything. Stagnation is not stability. It's resistance to your own design. The dissatisfaction you feel when you outgrow a situation isn't negativity. It's a signal. It's evidence that your current environment can no longer contain the version of you that's trying to emerge. Ignoring that signal doesn't make it disappear. It turns it into frustration, restlessness, and eventually regret. Most people misinterpret expansion as pressure, when in reality, it's permission. Expansion gives you permission to think bigger, choose differently, and expect more from yourself. When you deny that impulse, you begin to shrink your dreams to fit your circumstances instead of expanding your thinking to change them. That's not humility, that's self-reduction. Expansion demands that you release old identities. The version of you that survived cannot be the same version that thrives. Growth always requires separation from habits, from environments, and sometimes from people who are committed to who you used to be. That separation feels uncomfortable, which is why many people retreat. But discomfort is not danger, it's adjustment. Here's another hook most people avoid. You don't need more time, you need more range. The reason life feels repetitive is not because nothing is happening, but because your thinking hasn't expanded enough to access new outcomes. Expansion widens your options. It introduces new standards, new conversations, and new responsibilities. With expansion comes capacity, and with capacity comes influence. When you allow yourself to expand, your tolerance for mediocrity disappears. What you once accepted starts to feel misaligned. You no longer argue with yourself about why you should stay small. You recognize that shrinking costs more than growing. Expansion sharpens discernment. You become intentional about where you invest your energy because you understand that growth requires focus. Many people fear expansion because it demands visibility. As you grow, you're seen more, and being seen invites judgment. But here's the truth. Invisibility is not safety, it's obscurity. Expansion doesn't make you vulnerable, it makes you effective. Impact requires presence, and presence requires courage. Expansion also changes how you experience effort. When you're aligned with growth, effort feels meaningful instead of draining. You're no longer forcing movement, you're flowing in the direction of your design. Resistance fades when alignment increases. That's why some people seem energized by challenges while others feel exhausted. One is expanding, the other is resisting. Another powerful hook to consider: growth doesn't ask for permission, it asks for participation. Life will keep presenting opportunities to expand, but it will never force you to take them. Expansion is always an invitation. The cost of accepting it is discomfort. The cost of rejecting it is regret. When you embrace expansion, you stop living reactively. You begin to live proactively. You anticipate growth instead of fearing change. You understand that each new level requires a new mindset, and you willingly release what no longer fits. Expansion becomes a rhythm, not a risk. The moment you accept that expansion is your natural state, you stop negotiating your potential. You stop apologizing for wanting more. You stop explaining why you're evolving. Growth no longer feels like rebellion, it feels like alignment. And alignment has a way of unlocking doors you didn't even know existed. So here's the closing truth I want you to carry with you. You were not created to survive, you were created to expand. Stop shrinking your dreams to fit your circumstances. Expand your thinking so your circumstances are forced to catch up. Decide today that you will no longer think small, play small, or settle small. Because the moment you start thinking bigger, you don't just change your future, you activate it. Remember this always: you don't rise by thinking small, you rise by thinking in alignment with who you were truly designed to become.